In this episode of the Bird Feeder series, I'll tell you the top 10 tips that are essential before you set up or visit your feeder. In the end, I will also share a tip that elevated my photography at the feeder to a whole new level of effectiveness. Let's go! Timing is key. And this goes both for photography and feeding. Early mornings and late afternoons offer the best light for photography. The golden hour creates beautiful warm tones that can make your images really pop. But you should also plan your feeding schedule around these times so the birds will orientate themselves according to the food supply and visit the feeder when the conditions are the best. 1 or 2 hours before the really good light comes in should be perfect. Early mornings and late afternoons are also the times when the activity is the highest. Tip number 2, patience. Birds may take their time to approach the feeder. This goes especially for the beginning after you set up the feeder for the first time. Just give them some time to find, accept and get used to the feeder. But the same goes also for every session. Feed early. As I said, at least 1 hour before the right time for photography begins. Then settle in and wait. This patience will pay off. At my feeder it can take up to 2 hours until the birds arrive, but it can also only take 5 minutes. Also remember that some species might take longer to come in. Normally the small singing birds are the first ones to arrive. After the nuthatch comes and then the finches, then some other species, and at the very end woodpeckers and the jay come. So let's say your mission is to photograph the jay and there is only the small birds for hours. Don't think that it's not gonna come. In fact, this is exactly what you need. The more small birds feed and show that there is no danger around, the higher the chances for woodpeckers and the jay or all the other shy birds to come in. At my feeder, the feeding sometimes happens in bursts. So when the birds first arrive, they come all in a short period of time as they see and hear that there is something happening and there might be food. But that only lasts for about, let's say, 30 minutes. And after that, there is periods where there is no birds. And then suddenly the feeder is full of birds again, out of nowhere. And when you're bored during these lows, just observe the surroundings, look into your images, rate them, or just play around with your camera, play around with techniques, with backgrounds, whatsoever. Soon the birds are gonna come. You just have to be patient. Speaking of trying out techniques, tip number 3 is to use slightly faster shutter speeds. Even though there is times where there is not enough light to photograph with fast shutter speeds, especially when your feeder is in the woods, choose your shutter speeds a little higher than you would normally do. Birds can be really quick, not only when moving, also the change from a static sitting and feeding to flying off or fighting incoming birds can happen so fast that you can change your shutter speed in that moment. That's when you're happy, when your preset shutter speed was a little higher and the movements are not that blurry. Of course, when there's enough light, just crank that shutter speed as fast as you can and freeze everything. Now we're already talking settings. Remember that you're in a close distance to your subjects. It of course is important to get enough light in your lens and open that aperture, but you have to remember that bigger subjects like the blackbird, the jay, woodpeckers or birds of prey, wow, that was a cool rhyme, are bigger birds that could eventually be too big for your depth of field. For example, when photographing the jay and you're using, let's say, f6.3, but your distance is only 5 or 6 meters, the jay will not appear sharp completely, so from front to the back. When he's turning towards you, his head will be sharp, but his back or his tail might not. The same of course goes for 2 or more birds in your frame. When they are positioned in a different distance to you, one of them won't be in focus as your depth of field is just not big enough. By closing your aperture from, let's say, 6.3 to 8 or 9 or even f11, you can gain some depth that will bring them into your larger focus area. But let's get back to the feeding itself for a second, as I mentioned having a specific target in mind a few times now. Speaking for me, most of the times I want to photograph a specific bird. But different birds not only need different food, you can also plan the amount of the different types of food and the positioning of the food before your sessions to higher your chances to get your target in front of your lens. You should do that at least 3 to 4 times when feeding before your session. If you want to photograph the tits, just position sunflower seeds where you want to have the birds in front of your camera. If you want to photograph the wren or the robin, use bird food with more dried mealworms and lower the amount of sunflower seeds. When you want to photograph the jay, use more peanuts, they absolutely love them. But when you want to photograph shy birds, remember that they want to have the little birds around as kind of a safety indicator. So when you want to photograph the jay or woodpeckers, don't forget to feed smaller amounts of sunflower seeds and the other stuff too. Generally, you should always feed for all of the birds that are in your area. Just play with the amount and the positioning. Now tip number 6 is about distance. I know that the demand for photographers is high to get closer and closer to your subjects, but remember that we work with wild animals and that most of them still don't like humans too much. With a hide and a feeder, it's a great way to get really close to subjects, but don't overdo it. Don't try to get closer and closer. Most of the time it's not even necessary. Also, the closer the distance, the harder to move the camera. Let's say there is a bird on this edge over here and suddenly a woodpecker comes and arrives over there at the tree. There is almost no way to move the camera without scaring that bird over here or the woodpecker or both of them. Most likely it will be both of them, because when the small one gets up and screams because there's danger around, the woodpecker will too. Now in this case it still works, as I know how to behave with the birds around and they are used to it for years. But in the most cases it might not work. So with a safe distance you can easily control the movement of your camera and the distractions to the birds. If you want to get really close, just use teleconverters. But don't scare your birds away because you want too much. Now I just said I know exactly how the birds behave at my feeder. And that's actually true. I know which bird lands 90% of the time. Which trees and branches they use next to the feeder to get close. I know for how long they stay and... Hello. There's the woodpecker. There's a car. But let's keep going. I also know where they come from. Like in this case the woodpecker. The woodpecker always comes from that direction. You've heard it first over there. Then it goes to this tree over there. And then it comes to its tree that I put up for him. And I also know in which direction they will leave. I can also read their body language and anticipate when they take off, for just taking off or for a fight over their ground. I can see at some birds' behavior which species of predatory bird is around. I also see exactly when they recognized my movements and I have to stop and be dead still. These are all things that you have to observe and learn over and over again to spend the time at your feeder in the most effective way. Getting to know your subjects also helps in capturing behavioral moments. These moments often make the best shots as they have a story to tell. It's not just a squirrel, for example, it's a squirrel eating a nut. Or it's not just a robin sitting there, it's a robin fighting for its crown, for example. Look for these interactions, as they make your photo so much more compelling. Now tip number 9 is use a tripod. If you have one, use it. Not only for stability and reducing camera shake in low light conditions, it also allows you to rest, so you don't have to hold the camera for ages. It will make your life so much easier. Also, you don't have to lift the camera over and over again. These motions scare the birds away. And it's even better, you can position your camera pointing at the exact spot that you want to photograph, pre-focus it, so you just have to press buttons when the birds come. The tripod is just a game changer when photographing from the blind or the height. Probably the most important tip for your feeder is providing water. Birds need water for drinking and bathing so much. A simple bird bath can transform your feeder to a hotspot for 2 of their basic needs. That doubles the chances of visits and also of shots. You can create very dynamic shots by photographing them bathing with splashing water around them, or drinking is also a very interesting behavior to photograph. And now my bonus tip. My bonus tip is the trail camera. Most of the time you will not be around your feeder, but the animals will. You will be surprised which animals find their way to your feeder beside the ones you already could see. Especially when there is water at your feeder, but no other water course around, you will attract much more animals, such as deer, small mammals like mice, reptiles in the summer, and at night you might see owls coming to your bird bath and cleaning themselves. And it also gives you more insight to some patterns. With the trail camera, I could see very fast that I did not make a mistake when I tried to attract a jay. I was just there at the wrong time. I went for the golden hour in the evening all the time. And at some point I wondered if there were no jays around or if I did something wrong. Then when I set up the trail camera, the jay was there every day, but in the morning. So by setting up the trail camera, I now know exactly what to do to get the jay in front of my lens. Now it's your turn. Please let me and all the other people know about your experience at bird feeders and what we can do better. In the next episodes, I will show you the major mistakes that people do when it comes to bird feeders that can keep the birds away from visiting. As there is so much more coming in this series, just like a step-by-step tutorial to build a feeder like this one in no time. Just subscribe to the channel to not miss new episodes. See you next time, guys. The woodpecker said bye too. And again. And again. And again. Bye. Bye. See you.